The only thing expected of a princess was obedience. But Lyara made a mistake even the stars remembered. She questioned her kingdom and was cast out from her own palace. Now alone, weakened, and nearly dying on a hostile world, her fate rests in the hands of a human. Power, survival, and an unexpected bond. It all begins here. The morning sky over Zerf 9 was a bruised tapestry of violet and molten copper, streaked with jagged clouds that seemed to frown over the royal palace like a stern aunt who had seen too many misbehaving children. Within the marble corridors, lit by lamps that hummed with captured starlight, the court whispered and shuffled with the peculiar mixture of boredom and malice that only a group of beings who considered themselves the apex of civilization could produce. Princess Lyara, sitting cross-legged on the edge of a gilded balcony, stared at the horizon with a mixture of defiance and exasperation. Her silver-blonde hair caught the first light, spilling across her shoulders, and her long ears twitched with a sensitivity that made every whispered conspiracy and clipped insult feel amplified. She had always been tuned into the subtle undercurrents of courtly machinations, but today, every flick of a servant's tailcoat and every nervous glance felt like an overt attack. She had, according to the council, committed an unforgivable crime. That crime, by her reckoning, was nothing more than laughing at the esteemed minister of galactic compliance, while he solemnly declared that the stars themselves had decreed loyalty to the throne. Lyara had raised an eyebrow, tilted her head, and let out a sound somewhere between a snort and a giggle. The council had not appreciated it. The minister, offended, had done that thing that Zerfians did when someone disrespected cosmic authority. They had gnashed their teeth and summoned a tribunal. Lyara had sighed, adjusting the hem of her flowing robe, thinking really it's like they've never read a comic holo before. By the time the sun crested fully over the palace spires, she was already packed and stripped of her titles and jewels, her silks replaced with rough, utilitarian fabrics meant for survival rather than fashion. The royal escort, 3 grim-faced soldiers and a bureaucrat who kept muttering something about paperwork violations, shoved her toward the edge of the city and handed her over to the planetary shuttle. Lyara grumbled under her breath as the shuttle's engines roared, thinking that being cast out was far less glamorous than she had imagined. "I didn't even get a proper farewell cake," she muttered, narrowly avoiding a panic attack at the thought that some court official had probably eaten it. The shuttle lurched violently, the interior lights flickering as it cut through the thin atmosphere of Narvik. Outside, the red desert stretched endlessly, dotted with jagged rock formations and spires of crystallized minerals that shimmered faintly under the sun's harsh glare. It was a planet known for hostility, the kind of place that made even seasoned explorers squint and mutter expletives under their breath. Lyara peered out through the viewport, her long ears flicking nervously. Great. Deserted, dangerous, and nothing but hostile terrain. At least it matches my mood. She tried to make a joke, but the echo of the shuttle's engine made it sound more like a growl. The landing was rough. Narvik's gravity, heavier than Zerf 9, shoved her to the floor of the shuttle with a graceless thud. As the ramp lowered, a hot, dusty wind rushed inside, carrying the scent of iron and something faintly sweet that she assumed was some sort of carnivorous plant. She staggered out, brushing the grit from her robes, and looked around at the jagged, windswept plains. For a moment, she considered a dramatic feint, or at least throwing herself against a conveniently shaped rock. Then she remembered she was a princess, not a melodramatic hollow actor, and decided to march forward with dignity, even if that dignity was more of a wobbling shuffle at this point. The first few hours were educational. Lyara discovered that her silks were entirely inadequate for protection against the whipping winds and sharp stones. Her stomach growled, which was unfortunate, because her food rations were meager and tasted faintly of recycled moon dust. She muttered complaints, half at the planet, half at the bureaucrats who had deemed this a suitable punishment. "Seriously, I've read hollows of humans surviving worse," she said aloud, knowing no one could hear her. and they didn't even have long ears to get sunburned in. Her ears had already begun to turn pink, the skin sensitive and twitching at every airborne particle. As the day wore on, she began to notice the creatures of Narvik. Small, jagged scuttlers that looked like a cross between crabs and broken machinery skittered over the red sands, snapping at her heels when she wasn't careful. She waved a hand, and one of them made a dramatic leap backward, as if offended by her audacity. "Oh, please, I'm barely a threat," she said, trying to sound confident. The creature blinked multiple optical sensors at her and scuttled away, which she counted as a victory. Later, a faint rumble in the distance made her freeze. She had read about Narvik sandworms, long, serpentine predators that could swallow a human in a single gulp. A worm, however, was not in front of her. A smaller, less lethal predator passed by, sniffed at her, and promptly lost interest when she tripped over a crystal shard and muttered a colorful insult. By nightfall, exhaustion had set in. Lyara had found a shallow crevice for shelter, using shards of reflective mineral to ward off curious scavengers. She lay there, staring up at the alien stars, long ears twitching as she catalogued each constellation she barely recognized. Despite everything, she felt a flicker of amusement at the absurdity of it all, cast out, starving and likely to be eaten by some sandworm tomorrow, and yet somehow still alive. "Well, at least I can tell the court I survived exile with style," she whispered, though her style now involved a lot of mud, dust, and awkwardly tied hair. Meanwhile, Jonah, many light years away in his rusty, overworked survey ship, was blissfully unaware of the royal drama. His job was simple: locate and harvest rare asteroid minerals, avoid malfunctioning AI assistants, and try not to curse at the fuel lines too loudly. His sensors picked up a faint, irregular energy reading far below the expected planetary surface. At first he assumed it was an old automated mining drone, probably abandoned decades ago. Curious, and more than a little bored, he decided to investigate. Landing on Narvik's rocky fringe was like threading a needle while riding a mechanical bull, but Jonah managed to set the ship down without total destruction, which he considered a moral victory. The signal led him across jagged canyons and crystal spires, where the wind seemed determined to dislodge his helmet with its sheer force. Then he saw her, slumped against a jagged boulder, hair tangled, robes torn, skin pale but still faintly luminous, long ears flicking at every sound. Jonah froze, blinking, unsure whether he was hallucinating due to heat stroke or encountering some exotic survivalist cosplay gone terribly wrong. Hey," he called awkwardly, waving a hand. She opened one eye, glared, and muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, "You're late." Despite her weakness, Lyara's voice carried the sharp edge of royalty and the faint humor of someone who refused to die quietly. Jonah approached cautiously, tripping over a rock and swearing loudly, prompting a soft, almost imperceptible chuckle from her. It was the smallest sound, but it was enough to break the tension in the canyon. For the first time since her exile began, she felt a flicker of hope, or at least a flicker of amusement that the universe had decided she wouldn't face it entirely alone. She tried to sit up, grimacing at the effort. "You human types are clumsy, aren't you?" she said. Jonah, dusting himself off, grinned sheepishly. "We like to keep things interesting." She rolled her eyes, but her long ears twitched with something that might have been curiosity. "Well, you're better than a sandworm," she admitted grudgingly, which for Lyara was practically a compliment. As night deepened, the alien sky a swirl of violet, copper, and distant suns, Jonah helped her to a safer nook in the rocks, creating a makeshift shelter with scraps of metal and crystal shards. They huddled together, sharing warmth and ration bars, exchanging jokes that were brittle but necessary, a way to ward off the encroaching fear. She teased him about his ridiculously oversized human boots, and he retaliated with comments about her royal flair for drama. For hours they talked and laughed, the wind outside howling like some cosmic audience enjoying the absurdity of two beings thrown together by fate. By the end of the first night, Lyara had discovered something she hadn't expected. Even in exile, even on a planet designed to chew up the weak, life could still find its humor. And perhaps, just perhaps, a human with awkward charm could be more valuable than the entire court she had left behind. And Jonah, staring at the stars, wondered whether his next mineral survey might just involve surviving alongside the most unusual and entertaining alien princess the galaxy had ever exiled. The wind howled again, sand whipped against the crystalline spires, and somewhere in the darkness, a tiny scavenger squeaked. Lyara muttered an expletive, Jonah muttered something else, and together they survived. Somehow, improbably, and with humor intact. The first light of Narvik's twin suns spilled across the red plains like molten copper poured over jagged crystal. Princess Lyara woke with a groan, her long ears twitching violently as though protesting the sheer audacity of the planet's mourning. Somewhere nearby, a scuttler had decided that her exposed hair was a snack, and she batted it away, muttering curses in the refined tones of a princess who had never expected to wield a broken stick against predatory wildlife. Jonah, bundled awkwardly in a combination of salvaged thermal blankets and his own less-than-fashionable tunic, stirred beside her. He blinked at the rising suns with a groggy expression and muttered, "Do they really have to be that bright? Seriously, my retina implants are still calibrating." Lyara rolled her eyes, which in turn made her ears flick back in disapproval. "Oh, yes, humans are clearly the measure of universal suffering," she said dryly. "Next, you'll tell me the desert winds are tragic." Jonah grinned, flexing his fingers like a man who had survived worse, which in this context meant slipping on rocks repeatedly. "They're tragic, but not as tragic as my sense of fashion," he said, gesturing at his mismatched boots. By mid-morning, they were moving again slowly, because Narvik did not encourage hasty travel. The planet's terrain was a shifting puzzle of jagged rocks, patches of quicksand-like red dust, and crystal spires that refracted the suns, light into blinding, kaleidoscopic streaks. Lyara led, which was technically accurate, but the definition of leading here involved a lot of stumbling, exaggerated flailing, and occasional sarcastic commentary at Jonah's expense. "Step there, human, unless you want your head polished by Narvik's scenic granite," she warned, pointing dramatically. Jonah tripped anyway, and she sighed, tugging him upright by the collar of his tunic. "Honestly, you're like a baby sandworm," she said, and he laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." They scavenged what little resources they could find. Jonah rigged a crude filtration device out of his ship's spare tubing and an oddly hollowed crystal, muttering about how he was probably over-engineering it, while Lyara scavenged edible plants and insects, her long ears twitching at every subtle movement in the red dust. When a scuttler skittered past them, she smacked it with a rock, then handed it to Jonah. "Your turn. I've had enough violent encounters for one morning." He looked at it, shuddered, and tossed it back at her. "I think your species handles this better than mine. I'll stick to moral support and witty commentary." She snorted. "Yes, moral support. That's very useful when you're facing the imminent gnawing death of Narvik fauna." As they navigated through the jagged canyons, Jonah noticed a series of strange structures half buried in the red sands. At first, he assumed they were geological formations, but Lyara's keen eyes caught something more. Faint inscriptions glowing faintly in ultraviolet light, depicting scenes of a long-dead civilization, ships falling from the sky, humanoid figures with elongated ears, and strange, mechanical beasts that moved as if alive. "Ancient Narvikians," she murmured, squinting at the inscriptions, "or someone with a very artistic flair for doom." Jonah, fascinated, traced one glowing line with a finger, accidentally activating a hidden mechanism. A panel slid open with a hiss, revealing a chamber lined with shimmering panels and strange devices that hummed softly. Hello," he said cautiously. Lyara leaned in, her long ears flicking toward the hum. "Well, it looks like someone's been napping in technological paradise. Shall we disturb them?" Inside, they found relics of an old galactic surveying program, drones, energy canisters, and a partially functioning AI. Jonah fiddled with the devices and the AI sputtered to life, projecting a holographic map of Narvik with blinking red dots. "Do you see that?" he asked, pointing. Lyara tilted her head, her hair cascading over one shoulder. "Yes, it's either a map of trouble or a spectacular tourist guide. My money's on trouble." The AI, remarkably, had a sense of humor, making snide comments about the pair's survival odds. Lyara laughed aloud. "Finally, someone honest," she said. Jonah frowned. "You're taking advice from a computer. That seems humanly tragic." She grinned, tugging at one of her long ears. "It's better than taking advice from my family, that's for certain." They spent the next day exploring the chamber, repurposing the devices to improve their survival. Jonah rigged a small shield generator to create a barrier against the sandstorms, while Lyara used fragments of crystalline panels to reflect sunlight and signal for distant satellites. Their humor became a vital tool, breaking the monotony and the creeping fear. "I look fabulous in reflective crystal shards," Lyara said, adjusting a jagged panel into a makeshift tiara. Jonah snorted. "You mean like a post-apocalyptic prom queen?" She waved him off. "Exactly. Now fetch me a ribbon or I'll be offended." Despite the danger, they discovered subtle beauty in the alien world. Bioluminescent plants glimmered in the shadowed crevices, their soft glow illuminating Narvik's deadly terrain with an eerie, almost comforting light. Lyara, crouched beside a small pool of iridescent water, reached out to touch it. The surface shimmered, reacting to her presence with ripples that reflected her image back with a faint distortion, like a playful wink from the planet itself. "See that?" she said, grinning. "Even Narvik has a sense of humor." Jonah peered over her shoulder. "Or it's mocking us, hard to tell." She laughed, nudging him with an elbow. "Either way, it's charming." As days passed, they learned each other's quirks. Lyara, though a princess, revealed a surprising knack for improvisation, tying together vines to create traps, using her long ears as delicate but effective sensors for vibrations, and maintaining her sarcasm as a survival tool. Jonah, though awkward and human, proved unexpectedly resourceful, improvising tools from scraps and devising minor strategies that allowed them to move through predator territory with minimal casualties. They argued often, mostly about trivial matters like the proper orientation of reflective crystals, or whether a scuttler deserved a name, but always with a humor that softened their tenuous alliance. "I swear," Lyara said one evening as they camped beneath a jagged overhang, "if you drop your boot in a sandworm hole tomorrow, I'm leaving you to explain yourself to the worms." Jonah, holding the boot cautiously, smirked. "You mean leave you to the worms, right?" She flicked him sharply with a long ear. "Don't tempt fate, human." They discovered the remnants of an ancient Narvikian drone army, half buried and rusting in the red dust. Jonah examined the units, marveling at their technology. "These could help us theoretically," he said. Lyara raised an eyebrow. "Or we could accidentally activate a robotic apocalypse. I vote against it, but I like your optimism." They rigged one drone to act as a scout, giving them advanced warning of predators, and named it Gertrude, much to Jonah's amusement. "It's important to maintain morale," Lyara explained, patting the drone. "Gertrude will keep us company and ensure no worms eat you while I'm busy being fabulous." Jonah laughed, a genuine sound, watching the drone whir to life with a faint hum. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting long crimson shadows, Lyara leaned back against a jagged rock, staring up at the alien constellations. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "if anyone asked me yesterday what it felt like to be exiled, I would have said despair, horror, and indignity. Now I'd say, slightly absurd adventure with an overly clumsy human." Jonah, sprawled beside her, muttered, "I'll take that as a compliment." She flicked him with her long ear. "You should, it's a rare honor." The nights grew colder, and the challenges of survival became more pronounced, but humor threaded through every moment of fear and uncertainty. When a sandstorm struck unexpectedly, they bumbled together, Lyara tripping over her own improvised signal crystals while Jonah shielded her with a half-functioning energy panel, shouting commentary the whole time. "If we survive this, I want a medal," she yelled over the wind. Jonah grinned, shouting back, "Medal? I'm aiming for the Nobel Prize in improbable survival." They collapsed into laughter, teeth chattering, hair tangled and clothes smeared with red dust, but alive, and somehow inexplicably unbroken. By the end of the second week, they had established a rhythm, scavenging, defending, exploring, and laughing through the absurdity of it all. Liara's long ears had become invaluable for detecting threats. Jonah's improvisational skills saved them repeatedly, and their constant banter had become the glue holding them together. They joked about their odds of survival, about Gertrude's dramatic personality, and even about the cosmic absurdity of a princess and a human navigating a planet that seemed hell-bent on teaching them humility and sarcasm in equal measure. And yet beneath the humor, a quiet bond grew, a fragile trust that neither could fully articulate. Lyara found herself seeking his commentary, his clumsy observations, his stubborn optimism, and Jonah began to anticipate her wit, her sharp insights, her moments of quiet vulnerability that she tried desperately to mask with sarcasm. The alien planet, brutal and unyielding, had inadvertently created a partnership built not just on survival, but on shared absurdities and laughter, and a tentative understanding that life, even on a hostile world, could be lived fully if one embraced both danger and humor together. By the time another night settled over the red plains, the twin moons casting soft silvery light, Lyara whispered, almost to herself, "I might just survive this. Not because of royal blood, but because of this ridiculous human." Jonah, ear twitching at the comment, muttered, "And here I thought I was just keeping you entertained." She smiled faintly, ears brushing against the cool dust. "You're doing far more than that. You're part of the adventure." The wind howled again. A sand scuttler squeaked, Gertrude whirred softly, and somewhere deep in the jagged red landscape, two very different beings, one exiled princess, one clumsy human, prepared to face another day with courage, wit, and the sort of humor that only life on a hostile alien planet could inspire. The red plains of Narvik stretched endlessly beneath the twin suns, their light cutting through the jagged crystal spires and casting long, fractured shadows that danced like spectral jesters across the sand. Princess Lyara, once an elegant figure confined by royal decree, now moved with a purpose born of necessity and experience. Her silver-blonde hair, tangled yet gleaming faintly in the harsh light, whipped around her face as she balanced on uneven ground, ears flicking with precision at every subtle vibration in the air. She had learned, painfully and humorously, that the planet demanded attention, wit, and a tolerance for absurdity in equal measure. Jonah, trudging a few paces behind, muttered something about Narvik having a personal vendetta against human ankles, and she couldn't help but snort, the sound carrying across the desolate landscape. "I think your ankles have offended the sand gods personally," she said, tossing a jagged crystal shard at his boot. He yelped, hopping on one foot, and she laughed, a laugh that had grown lighter since exile, freer, more resilient. The past weeks had been a series of challenges that neither would have survived alone. From scavenging in jagged canyons to evading the planet's predatory fauna, from makeshift shelters in crystal crevices to the discovery of the ancient Narvikian drone army, they had learned to anticipate each other's reactions, to trust each other's instincts, and to survive on a planet that seemed intent on teaching them humility with a sharp, ironic grin. Humor had been their lifeline, a thread through the tension, a way to remind themselves that no matter how absurd or dangerous the situation, the mind could remain sharp and the spirit undiminished. That morning began like any other, with the wind whipping across the plains and the twin suns glaring down like judges at a tribunal of survival. Lyara led, scouting ahead with her heightened senses, her long ears twitching at every faint sound. Jonah followed, carrying what remained of their scavenged supplies, occasionally muttering jokes that earned him an eye roll or a flick of Lyara's ears. They stumbled upon a narrow canyon, partially collapsed, and revealing the remnants of an ancient Narvikian observatory, half buried beneath layers of red dust. The structure hummed faintly, still powered by an ancient solar matrix, and Lyara's eyes lit with cautious excitement. "Looks like someone left us a little puzzle," she said, stepping carefully through the entrance. Jonah peered over her shoulder. "I call it the potentially deadly puzzle of doom." She smirked. "I call it Tuesday." Inside, the observatory was a labyrinth of crystalline walkways and holographic consoles that flickered sporadically with data. Jonah instinctively began tinkering with a console, causing a holographic projection to flicker to life, a star map of Narvik's neighboring systems, dotted with blinking red alerts indicating areas of instability. Lyara crouched beside him, scanning the projection, her long ears twitching in concentration. "These anomalies," she murmured, "they're not just natural. Someone's been experimenting here, leaving traps and decoys." Jonah frowned. "Traps, decoys, basically everything we've been running from this whole time. Fantastic." She shot him a mock glare. "I was going to say fantastic, but your human pessimism is, as always, delightful." They spent hours exploring the observatory, deciphering Narvikian technology and repurposing drones that hummed obediently under their command. Gertrude, the drone they had named weeks earlier, became their scout and messenger, zipping through the tunnels and corridors while Lyara and Jonah bickered good-naturedly over tactics. "I swear," Lyara said, adjusting a reflective panel to redirect sunlight into a sensor array, "if that drone gets a personality complex, I'm quitting." Jonah laughed. "It already has one. It's just that yours is louder." As the day turned toward dusk, a violent tremor shook the observatory, sending crystal shards clattering and dust cascading from the ceilings. Lyara grabbed Jonah's arm instinctively. "Well," she said wryly, "I always wanted to test my reflexes against falling debris." Jonah, half-dazed, grinned. "I think Narvik has a thing against us personally." They managed to stabilize themselves and the equipment, learning through trial, error, and humor that their teamwork had evolved. What had begun as awkward survival instincts had matured into synchronized efficiency. She could read the subtle tremors and vibrations of the ground, while he improvised solutions with mechanical precision, their combined skills now greater than the sum of their parts. Night fell over Narvik, the twin moons rising to cast a soft silver glow across the jagged plains. Lyara and Jonah settled into their makeshift camp inside the observatory, which now offered some protection against predators and sandstorms. They shared a meal of scavenged roots and dehydrated rations, interspersed with sarcastic commentary on each other's eating habits. "You're eating that like it's a delicacy," Lyara teased, flicking a crumb off Jonah's tunic. He shrugged. "Well, someone has to keep the morale high. Humor helps digestion." She rolled her eyes, but the warmth in her expression betrayed her amusement. Days passed, and their routine solidified into a rhythm of exploration, resource gathering, and cautious diplomacy with the alien fauna and Narvikian drones. One afternoon, they discovered a subterranean canyon network, teeming with luminescent flora and fauna that seemed almost magical in contrast to the harsh exterior. Lyara crouched beside a glowing pool, reaching out to touch it. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Even this world has pockets of mercy." Jonah, sitting nearby and tinkering with a drone, nodded. "Or it's mocking us again. Either way, I like it." She laughed softly. "I suppose that's one way to appreciate irony." Their conversations deepened beyond jokes and survival tactics. Lyara began to reveal moments of vulnerability, her fears of the throne, of being exiled, of trusting anyone outside her royal circle. Jonah listened, offering reassurance, often in the form of humor, often in the form of quiet presence. He shared his own insecurities, the endless disappointments of a life spent scavenging across stars, and slowly their trust became unshakable. The alien princess who had arrived on Narvik isolated and frightened had become a resilient, resourceful leader, capable of strategizing, improvising, and laughing even when the odds were stacked against her. Jonah, the bumbling human, had grown into a dependable partner, confident in his skills and secure in the bond they had forged. One morning, they detected an unusual energy spike in the distance. Following it, they discovered a crashed transport from the royal fleet, partially buried in sand. Lyara's eyes narrowed. Well, isn't that convenient? Royal business or more cosmic mischief? Jonah raised an eyebrow. I vote for mischief. You always were dramatic. She smirked, ears flicking. And you always were sarcastic, perfect match. They approached cautiously, activating sensors and drones to check for danger. Inside, they found data crystals detailing the royal family's attempts to track and retrieve Lyara, a record of her exile, her supposed demise, and the political implications of her absence. Lyara stared at the holographic projection, the data shimmering across her face. They expected me dead, she said quietly. Jonah leaned beside her. And yet here you are, alive and not gnawed on by worms. Score one for the princess. She let out a short, humor-laced laugh. I suppose it is, isn't it? She studied the records, realizing that her perspective had shifted. She no longer desired the palace, the throne, or the hollow validation of court approval. Survival, partnership, laughter, and the freedom to choose her own path were far more valuable. With Jonah's help, she repurposed the transport systems, turning it into a mobile base that allowed them to explore and map Narvik safely. They navigated past sandworm territories, through crystalline forests, and along subterranean rivers that shimmered with phosphorescent life. Their humor remained constant, a thread weaving through peril, absurdity, and discovery. Jonah often quipped about Princess Lyara, conqueror of red dust, or general of glowing pools, and she retaliated with sarcastic titles for him, often involving heroic failure or moral ambiguity. Weeks later, when the twin suns dipped below the horizon and the moons cast long silver beams across the desert, Lyara stood atop a cliff, looking down at the vast expanse they had mapped and survived. Jonah joined her, handing her a warm drink salvaged from the transport. Well, he said, if someone had told me a month ago I'd be navigating Narvik with a sarcastic alien princess, I would have, well, probably still done it, but I wouldn't have expected this. She sipped, ears flicking, and smiled faintly. Neither would I, but it turns out survival is more fun with a partner who keeps things interesting. Lyara turned, looking at Jonah. She had changed in ways subtle and profound, strength tempered by humor, resilience tempered by connection, leadership tempered by empathy. Exile had stripped her of privilege but gifted her freedom, insight, and an unbreakable bond with someone utterly different yet profoundly aligned. Jonah's clumsy courage, humor, and adaptability had complemented her own abilities, forming a partnership that could endure the harshest of worlds. They laughed together as the wind kicked up, swirling the red dust around them. Gertrude, their ever-loyal drone, hovered nearby, performing intricate loops as if applauding their improbable survival. Lyara flicked a crystal shard at Jonah playfully. I suppose we make quite the team, she said. Jonah grinned, catching it awkwardly. The best in the galaxy, if I do say so myself. She rolled her eyes but smiled, a genuine expression of contentment and quiet pride. As night fully fell, Narvik's alien stars glittered above, a silent testament to their endurance, their growth, and their improbable journey. Lyara, once a princess exiled and abandoned, had discovered self-reliance, ingenuity, and the joy of companionship unbound by royal expectation. Jonah, once a wandering human, had found purpose, adventure, and trust in a being beyond his comprehension. Together, they had survived the hostile world, discovered its hidden wonders, and forged a bond resilient enough to face any challenge the universe might yet throw their way. The wind whispered through the red plains, scuttlers squeaked in the distance, and the drones hummed their quiet song. Lyara and Jonah, laughing softly, watching the alien horizon, understood that they had not merely survived Narvik, they had transformed within it, emerging stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever awaited them beyond the hostile stars. And in the vast, indifferent galaxy, that was a victory worthy of their combined wit, courage, and enduring humor.